Players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most powerful in the history of Magic the Gathering. Delver of Secrets, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Meddling Mage, and many others. Battling head-to-head in brutal combat, they all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy in the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind BoshNRoll on YouTube, ThrabenU University, and theepicstorm.com.
Hello, and welcome to episode 50 of the Eternal Glory podcast, The Biggest Bangers. I'm Phil Gallagher, joined as always by Bryant Cook and Brian Coval. How are y'all doing tonight?
I'm hoping that this is going to be a banger.
Is it the biggest banger?
I'm going to guess that this is going to be a medium banger.
I mean, the episode might be a medium banger, but the set might be the biggest banger of all time.
We're talking about Modern Horizons 2, if that wasn't clear contextually, or if you're listening to this episode a year from now. We're talking about Modern Horizons 2.
Set is stacked.
Yeah, so I recorded a Modern League last week, and like when this set hits, everything that everyone knew about Modern will be dead. The format just got injected with all of the roids known to mankind.
I published my video today, which was another Twiddlestorm update, because I knew that it wasn't going to be affected by Modern Horizons, so I should get it out now before all the other new stuff comes out.
Yeah, I'm working hard to clear my donation queue in time for this set, because people were like, had their torches and pitchforks out when I was like a week behind on releases when Oko and Dreadhorde Arcanist got banned. I can't even imagine what they're going to say if just like 100 new cards are relevant in every format. Like, what are you doing? We don't want to see Rug Delver. So.
All right, let's get into the magic in a minute, but let's do real life first. Bryant, how's things? What are you up to?
I was in Hawaii/Maui for 8 days, and it was delightful. Got a little bit of a tan, got to relax a little bit, but my flight back, I picked up a book at the Maui airport. David Wright's autobiography. He was a New York Met, one of my favorite players of all time. And in it, he talks a lot about imposter syndrome, which is something that we talked a lot about in the last episode, and how he never felt like he was good enough. Even when David achieved great things, there was this voice always saying like, well, I wasn't this, or I didn't achieve that. Well, I made the All-Star game, but I'm not the best player here. And it really shed some light that even the greatest people or greatest athletes in the world deal with the same things that we as Magic players deal with. And that there's always this strive to be better and this voice telling you that maybe you're not good enough. And it was sort of interesting to read about, and I thought I'd share that.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's not just a Magic thing.
Yeah. Somewhat related to that, we played with some statistics I went to Alex Bistecki's wedding this past weekend, Invitational Champion Germ Token Alex Bistecki. I was a groomsman, and just in the wedding party alone, we had 3 Pro Tour competitors. So we had the reception draft fired, and the question was asked, like, is this the most Pro Tour experience that's ever been in a wedding reception draft? And I hard vetoed that because I know that, like, Luis Scott Vargas is married, and like it's certainly been done. Like, you've heard the stories from like the Hall of Famers, but then we were like, certainly in the 1% of all weddings ever, this is the most Pro Tour competitors to ever draft at this wedding reception. And like when you think about like the grand scheme of Earth and time, like it's probably the 0.0001% of Magic skill in a draft. So like when you're in the imposter syndrome, it's like, I'm in the 0.01%, but there's a 0.001% above me, and I'll never reach that. And once you like really break it down, you get a little more comfortable in your own skin.
I like that analogy.
All right, so
what have you been up to, Phil?
I took a 4-day trip to Charleston, South Carolina, and it was exactly what I needed. I was kind of burnt out from the school year, just kind of needed a vacation, and I just got together with one of my Magic buddies and his wife and one other friend, and we just kind of like walked around the beach, ate at a bunch of places with outdoor seating, just kind of chilled, had drinks, relaxed, went to breweries, walked and saw cool old houses. I just like did stuff for 4 days straight. And it was exhausting and refreshing and everything that I possibly needed right now. If you miss magic events, just take a vacation. It's almost as good.
Did you happen to have any oysters while you were down there? When I visited Charleston, that's what everyone recommended, is like the fresh oysters.
I didn't do oysters. I did some other seafood, and it was pretty good.
Nice.
Other than that, I've started ticking off my to-do list of things that I've put off for the last year and a half because of COVID and because of just crazy teacher end of the year. So now it's like dentist, doctor, eye doctor, car service, all that sort of stuff. And I feel very productive right now. What about you, Brian?
I am also on summer break now. I think in our last episode, I was saying I have an out-of-town wedding this weekend and a wedding the weekend after that. Well, those are now the previous 2 weekends because that's how linear time works. And my first wedding was in Nashville, and Nashville was pretty cool. I ate a lot of hot chicken, which is what they're famous for. I think I ate it for like 5 of 7 meals when I was in town. And I was happy with that experience. However, the turn and burn of like drive 10 hours to Nashville on Friday, wedding, 1 day of relaxing, drive 10 hours back Monday, finish my school year Tuesday through Friday, straight into Alex's wedding that I already mentioned, rehearsal dinner Friday night, wedding on Saturday, and then suddenly it was Sunday, and my 2-week buffer that I have built into my YouTube releases was gone because I was busy and out of town for 2 weeks. And for those 2 weeks, it was like, oh, this is so great. I don't have to record content. But then, like, for the first time, it was like, I need to record Sunday for Monday. And under the gun, I haven't felt that in months. And there was also no food in my house because we ate everything or threw out what we wasn't going to last before we left for Nashville. And then we just had this rocket of a week leading up to the second wedding and finishing the school year. My union drive passed, by the way. That happened in that week, too. So the official vote is in and we're done. Like, all of that happened in that week. So I've spent the last 3 days. It's now Tuesday. Like, Sunday was just a pure recording day because it has to be ready for Monday. Then Monday, I, like, did some grocery shopping, mowed the lawn. That was horrendous. Like, I was embarrassed to live in this house for a couple days with the state of the lawn. So I have not quite relaxed yet, despite being on summer break, but I feel things slowing down. I went grocery shopping today, did some major shops, did a Costco run and the regular grocery store, and like there's food in the house now. Feel like I can take a breath starting tomorrow.
Yeah, I have to do that grocery shopping still. There's no food.
Brian, you mentioned driving. That's actually a fear that I've had over COVID is as Magic players, we end up driving for 7 hours to a tournament or whatever, at least the grinder types do. And I haven't done that in a year and a half. Well, it's been in my mind, like, is my body going to be ready for this? My old man back, all that good stuff. Well, in Maui, my wife signed us up for the road to Hanan or Hana or however you pronounce it. You drive around a mountain to get to this tiny town, and there's a lot of one-ways and one-way bridges. And it took maybe 8 hours. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm ready for magic trips again. All these like dangerous turns and whatnot, one-way bridges, and like you backing up so other people can get through and everything else. Like, I think I'm ready. Like, let's go.
Nice. I was genuinely excited for my 20 hours of driving going into that Nashville trip because like you said, I used to drive 20 30 hours a month just on weekends to get to these magic events and back, and just haven't done it in a year and a half. And I was just so excited to just put on podcasts, get in the zone, have some driving snacks, just experience that again, because I do love that. It's frequently like, I mean, if I had the option to just teleport where I'm going, I would obviously take it. But I do enjoy the road trip aspect of that we haven't gotten in a while.
For sure.
Speaking of COVID stuff, how are the mask regulations in New York and the Carolinas down there, Phil? Because in Pennsylvania, it's now like all businesses have just gone to it's optional, or like you don't have to wear a mask if you're vaccinated. And I am vaccinated, and the CDC says it's cool. So like I'm cool following their recommendations, but I've spent the last 16, 17 months programming myself that people who don't wear masks in public are pure evil, just selfish monsters, complete garbage. So like, even though I don't legally or medically need to wear a mask anymore, I still just do every time I leave the house. And I'm like walking past people who don't have them on, including store employees. And I'm like, I'm not mad at you anymore, but what's wrong with me? Like, can I just take this thing off? And then that there's definitely some unlearning now that is going on in my head.
Well, I was on Leaving a Legacy 2 weeks ago, and I felt like I was breaking up mom and dad from a fist fight because Pat was on the no one should have to wear masks anymore train and Jerry wasn't. At least here in New York, it's optional as long as you're vaccinated, but I will admit it is a little bit weird. Even when you're outside and I'm too close to someone, I'm like, get away, I'm going to put my mask on.
I'm still on the wear mask indoors at all times phase. Like, I would like to be someone setting that example, even if I personally don't need to. I don't know. Maybe it's a lost battle at this point because people who didn't want a mask before aren't going to be doing it now. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah, it's weird.
I will be okay with being slightly less comfortable for 10 minutes while I'm running into the grocery store to, be the person wearing a mask.
Yeah, I've just been putting up with it for now, but I feel like it's coming soon where I will just walk into Target fearlessly without a mask on. And though I will say the worst part of it is that my local grocery store has peeled up all the one-way signs and like that sort of stuff. And I loved the one-way and like traffic rules in the grocery store, because I've said this on the pod before, how I feel like those should always be in place just for common courtesy and logistical reasons. And like, I don't want like 6 carts in my way going different directions and like people just parked and shit in the middle of the aisle I'm trying to walk down. But all of that is back. There's no longer rules. I'm no longer within my rights to be mad at anyone for coming down the lane the wrong way.
I will say that was one of my favorite things about Charleston, is every place I ate at was just outdoor seating. Everything was beautiful, very frequently with, a view of water of some kind. Didn't have to think about that stuff basically at all while I was out there. It was nice.
Nice.
All right, are we ready to move into donations?
I think so.
Let's do it up.
Thank you very much to Jordan Wood, John Vanilla, Silas Riano, Marcus Daum, and Matt Hackbert for your support of the podcast. We really appreciate it. It keeps us doing the things that we're loving to do.
We should probably thank Phil. It's been a few episodes. So thank you to Force of Phil on Twitter, Phil Blockman of the Eternal Durdles podcast, for wonderfully editing our stupid voices.
What it do, baby? Yeah, you already know.
All right, let's do some magic updates and then get this show on the road. So like Brian, I've been powering through the tail end of my donation queue. I think I have 3 decks left in my queue that are like Modern Horizons 2. So I'm going to be powering those out in the next couple of days, and then everything that I have will be recent content. And I've also been doing content production for 5 years now. I realized as of June 23rd, Thraben University will have been live for 5 years. So I'm gonna, it's mostly written, but I wrote kind of a 5-year retrospective, like content plans, that sort of thing, which was mostly for me, but I'm sure some people will enjoy reading the inside baseball sort of stuff.
Yeah, I did something similar when the Epic Storm hit 5 years in 2020. Like, it's just nice to look back and see how far you've come. Another cool thing that you can do, or at least is what I did, was I used the Wayback Machine to see the first iteration of the site to now and look at the changes. It's sort of fun.
Oh, I don't want to do that because my site mostly looks the same. The content has gotten better. The appearance, no. I do have some plans in the back pocket to actually adjust some of that stuff, but I've been saying that for years, so no promises.
You mentioned your to-do list. Mine, for the first time in over 2 years, is completely empty other than YouTube video ideas. It feels really, really nice.
Yeah, I have a lot of stuff queued up, but mine is very close to empty as well. I've had a productive week here.
So I guess I'll go next. For MTG updates, I really only have one main point, and it's that maybe we should all be a little bit more open-minded towards, and this fits into our topic for today, but towards spoilers and cards that are being previewed. Don't always think of cards as this doesn't fit into this shell. Sometimes things require a rebuild or an entirely new deck. They don't always just slot in instead of another card. There's a few cards that were spoiled for the Epic Storm that I was somewhat interested in. Strike It Rich, which is a 1 red sorcery, create a treasure token, and then flashback for 2 in a red. And then Galvanic Relay, which is a new red sorcery for 2 in a red, has Storm. You exile the top card of your library. You can cast that spell next turn. So these were 2 cards that I was like, these have possibilities. They were being talked about a little bit in the Storm Discord and some chats, and people were just really negative about them from the get-go without really thinking of the possibilities of these cards. And I just don't think it's how you really want to be. I used to think that way too. Like when Hope of Gearper came out, I said, this is just a worse Xanadu Torma. I'd never play this. But I never stopped and thought about, this could theoretically turn on Mox Opal, which is something I did later when I had, that growth. And it's just something that can help you be better. Like, I think Relay is actually pretty interesting. I don't want to go too deep on this, but the next turn thing, that's like everyone's big hang up. I know these 2 cards aren't the same, but Necroponents also says next turn. Your Storm Engines don't always need to win the same turn. And I understand there's a gap in playability there, but don't let that one line of text bother you.
Strong advice. I'm also shredding through my donation queue. I mentioned that I'm trying to get it clear in time for Modern Horizons 2 to drop. That means I will be releasing videos 7 days per week, just every single day at 10 a.m. It used to be weekdays. For the summer, I'm looking at 7 days a week, and I hope it doesn't crash too hard in the fall when I have to go back to work and I can play Magic again, and then I'm doing 3 a week. But 7 days a week's the plan for a while, and I'm also experimenting with some new editing software that automatically purges dead air, and I ran a 2-hour and 40-minute league through it this weekend, and it came out 1 hour and 30 minutes long, so literally 1 hour and 10 minutes of irrelevant dead air time just came straight out of a video. So look for sleeker videos on my channel in the next couple weeks. If it's too fast and stressful, give me that feedback. If you love it, give me that feedback. I really want to keep trying to make those videos better for everyone.
That's really awesome. I do have a fear. So other content creators also do this sort of thing. I'm sure you know that, Brian. That said, I have my big stupid face on the screen, and I know that Phil also has himself on the screen. I'm afraid that if I were ever to do that, you would just see me glitching in the corner. So I don't know if it's possible for the type of content that I create, but it's something I've thought about.
Yeah, so the getting into some inside baseball stuff, when I ran that 2-hour and 40-minute video through the editing thing, it cuts out the dead air and spits out a series of clips that you then merge back together into one video. It was 1,920 clips when I was done. So if you can imagine, if you, a human being, are on camera and you're moving at all or even talking, I imagine we would see you glitch or tweak out 1,920 times over the course of the video, and that would be really distressing. So I don't know if that would work if you're actually on camera. And the only reason that I'm not on camera in my videos is that I don't want to worry about that second layer of presentability. I want to roll out of bed with my hair crazy, just wearing my PJs and record if that's what I want to do. And now it seems like that's dovetailing perfectly into this new editing option. So I lucked out by being lazy, I guess.
All right, I'm excited to see where that goes, because either it'll be really funny to watch because it'll be so horrible, or it'll be really good and I might need to steal your idea. Either way, it's winning for me.
Well, it is Tuesday right now. It'll be Thursday or Friday when this video goes live. All of the videos this week use that technology. So 2 are live now. 2 more will be live by the time the readers are hearing this. I've said readers twice, like this is a book. So thank you for reading our pod book, by the way, everyone, since I seem to be locked in on that.
All right, let's get into the thick of it. So there's a lot of legacy podcasts and a lot of places that are kind of combing through every playable card in this set, and there's a shit ton. We're not going to do that. We're going to talk about like 4 cards and talk about them a bit more exhaustively, and then depending on how long we've ranted and rambled for, we might do a couple of quick hits at the end. And we're going to start with arguably the best card from the set, Dragon's Rage Channeler. And
it's bananas.
It is
so good.
It is disgusting that I have to say arguably, because that speaks to just the sheer power level of this set.
All right, let me read this Mamma Jamma for our auditory medium listeners who cannot see it with their eyes.
I thought they couldn't read it.
I've learned from my mistakes. All right, so Dragon's Rage Channeler. This is a 1 red mana creature-human shaman. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, surveil 1. Surveil is, of course, look at the top card of your library. You may put it in your graveyard. And then it has Delirium. As long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, Dragon's Rage Channeler gets +2/+2 flying and attacks each combat if able, and it's a 1/1 at base stats if I didn't say that. So once you are Delirious, it's a 3/3 flyer that has to fight. And it has a static ability that provides card selection and helps get it Delirious. So let's talk about this thing.
I get, like, there's so many places to start with this one. Why don't we start with the Surveil ability? What do we think about that?
Okay, so are we just imagining that this is a 1 red mana enchantment with no power and toughness, and just when you cast a non-creature spell, Surveil? Like, is that the thought experiment, or are we...
I was more interested...
How deep dive are we going
I
here?
was more interested in how good is this Surveil ability? You know, should we be viewing this as, oh, sometimes that does something, or this is giving us real, tangible value? You know, is this a tacked on line of text, or is this important?
Well, on average, I think you will get to Surveil, and I think this is a low estimate, 3 to 4 times. Like, realistically, I think that's a reasonable number for this card to Surveil. And you getting to fix the quality of your draws 3 or 4 times over the course of a game, while possibly getting a Delver of Secrets attached, is just degenerate. So many people read this card and forget that it gains flying. Wow.
Yeah, so Surveil is, of course, powerful in... So we're constantly talking about, in the Legacy community, Legacy content is constantly talking about how you manipulate your cantrips. Like, how do I stack this Ponder? Can I shuffle this Brainstorm? So if you Brainstorm, you Surveil 1 first. If you don't like that card, it's gone. So Brainstorm now sees 4, just right off the bat. And then if you don't find a shuffle, you put 2 back, you Ponder, you Surveil one of those 2 cards away, and now instead of working through 2 dead cards, you're working through 1 dead card, and the Ponder sees more. So you're basically adding 1 extra look to every cantrip you cast, where these decks are entirely based on the cantrips finding the cards you need and getting extra looks to improve card quality. So this Surveil is not flavor text. This is very much an important aspect of the card.
It's like a Tarmogoyf that grows itself, too. Like, it starts off as that 1/1, but you cast a couple of cards, you will Surveil stuff into the graveyard that will grow it. And if you want to get spicy, you can also just be surveilling stuff and, like, working towards a Delve creature as well. We might be going away from those because Delirium, but, you know, there still might be 1 or 2 of those in the 75 somewhere.
Well, I think that there's also some cards that we could be playing to improve our Delirium. A card that everyone knows that I'm obsessed with, Mishra's Bauble. To me, it's a no-brainer. So 1, it's insane with Expressive Iteration, which means that you can cast an Iteration on turn 2, hit that free spell, and put a card to your hand while creating Delirium. And if you play a Dragon's Rage Channeler on turn 1 into turn 2 Iteration, hit that Bauble, there's a pretty good chance that you're Delirious on turn 2 now. And it's not out of the question. It's, you know, it's really good. But it comes with a little bit of friction, right? Because if you're playing Mishra's Bauble, that is a card that doesn't trigger Delver of Secrets. But I think the cost is pretty low because such a large portion of your deck is instants and sorceries, where having a few copies of Mishra's Bauble isn't really going to hurt you that much.
I think you do have to make some deck building concessions in order to play this card optimally. Like when you're playing Delver, you want a crap ton of instants and sorceries that can help set up the top of your library, right? Well, with this card, you really want more than just the traditional types of cards in your deck. Like you want an artifact, an enchantment, a tribal card, or something like that. So I would not be surprised to see, a Seal of Fire or a Tar Fire or something of that nature find its way into the 75 somewhere, just as another card that can help get this thing delirious, or you have delirium, however you want to say that, early on consistently.
I think that Chain Lightning is a slot that a lot of people will look at for these sort of effects. Previously, a lot of decks that were looking for, sorcery for Tarmogoyf looked at Chain Lightning because otherwise you just had Ponder. With Expressive Iteration, that's changed. You now have 8 super playable sorceries in your deck where Chain Lightning isn't, as necessary as it was in the past.
Yeah, and you are definitely going to have to play Baubles and Tarfires and that sort of thing. I have played with Delirium spells in Delver Shells before. I played Invasive Surgery for a while in my Grixis Delver sideboard back in the day, and I will tell you that card was never delirious. Like, it didn't matter how long the game went. I think I played like 3 major tournaments, like Star City level events with Invasive Surgery in my sideboard. I won one of those tournaments, and I promise you Invasive Surgery never exiled anything. So, but I just had it as mostly envelop with upside, rather than actually trying to surgical extract everything with it. It was just like flavor text that sometimes was great. But if you're really trying to get this, what is this card called? Dragon Rage Channeler into the red zone as a 3/3, you're going to have to make some significant deck building considerations to that end.
I like Phil's idea of Tarfire. I don't know if Phil read that somewhere or just thought of it himself, but it's brilliant. It gives you 2 of the 3, or 2 of the 4. Fetch land is, super easy, which just means that you have to cast a sorcery, or surveil into a creature. I mean,
or a bauble.
Yeah, that seems really good and a quick way of enabling it to me.
Nah, that's my tech. Everyone can have it. Other people, I'm sure, have already thought of it. But when you play enough bad donation deck lists, you're just like, I have just the tech from this Grim Flayer League for you. Let me tell you.
Yep. And all of this is public information. If you go back 2 years or so, look at the Jund Shadow lists. They had Tarfire, they had Seal of Fire, they had Mishra's Bauble, they were playing Grim Flayer. Like, if you want to get delirious, you should use Modern as your benchmark. Like, go look at those old Shadow lists, because they were really in on that.
So why don't we talk a little bit about the power of evasion? So when people often, at least what I've read so far through like Reddit and other forums, Dragon Rage Channeler, this card is always compared to Monastery Swiftspear. Is that a fair comparison? Let's start there.
Hell no. What are you scared of in Delver? It's the shit that flies that you can't chump block. It's that giant, sprite dragon. It's the whale that like you just don't have a blocker for on turn 5 or whatever. And the fact that this has evasion will mean that every single creature that you are playing in Delver has evasion at some point in the game, and that is terrifying.
Yeah, that's a really big upgrade for this deck. I've watched people play the Swiftspear builds, and Swiftspear will get in there the first few turns and then is chump blocked the rest of the game. So if you're not playing mutagenic growth or something crazy, it ends up being a little lackluster late.
And that also is determined by the context of the deck, because in Delver, yeah, sure, Nimble Mongoose is unplayable for a reason these days. But if, assuming we've only talked about this card in the frame of a Delver deck, if we're talking about Red Prowess or Is It Prowess, which I got absolutely dumpstered in one of my leagues recently in Legacy by Red Prowess. I just died from 18 and I was extremely impressed. But does that deck want a card like this? Or is this a Delver exclusive conversation? So the question of comparing it to Monastery Swiftspear requires more context. Unless we are just assuming we're playing Blue-Red Delver. Is that the brain space we're working from here for this episode?
That's what I was guessing based on
Yeah.
the previous conversation.
Okay, all right. That's fine. I will reframe my thoughts for that and just make sure that the listeners are with us here. So we're specifically talking about Izzet Delver, or possibly with a third color, but a core Izzet Delver deck.
Yeah. So just for background, for those of you who might not be playing a ton of Legacy, right now, pre-Modern Horizons 2, Blue Red Delver is probably the best deck in the format, and it is getting a shot in the arm. That's why we're so zeroed in on this deck right now. It is unquestionably the deck to beat now, and it's still going to be the deck to beat. There just might be branching directions that the deck goes, because there's another really good card that we'll talk about in a minute or two.
So if you combine Izzet Delver with Blue Red Delver, Izzet Delver is 10% of the metagame right now, and Rug Delver is 5%. So 15% of the metagame right now is Delver variants. And the next deck down is, they're listing it as Bug Control, but it's both Grixis and Bug Control combined into one, and that's 5%. And that's the next most popular deck according to Goldfish. And I mean, you need to take Goldfish data with a grain of salt, because it's intentionally watered down by Wizards to make it look more diverse. So that 15% is much larger than we actually know, because they're not giving us the full metagame picture. So Delver's everywhere right now, and it is dominating, and it's only getting better.
Every time I play a donation league with a deck that has a bad Delver matchup, I'm just like praying, like, please don't let it be 3 or 4 rounds versus Delver. Like, I can't take it. I got absolutely dumpstered by something that just could not beat Delver to save its life today, and it was a brutal league.
All right, guys, I have a few questions for you. The first is, what do we think of must attack on Dragon Rage Channeler?
So it's a downside. Like, it's less flexible than a Delver in that regard, but I don't actually think that's all that bad. So at its base stats, it's a 3/3 flyer once it has that ability. And there's not a ton of things that just easily trade with that early in the game. When you reach the later stages of the game, you can start running into things like, say, a Flicker Wisp that can trade with it. But there's not very many bodies in Legacy that are just going to eat that and come out unscathed. It's more fringe playables, like Restoration Angel, Shifting Ceratops. I'm stretching here. It's hard to not trade with that body.
Yeah, I mean, it is among the biggest things, trading off Delver. The Nightmare scenario is, of course, a Mother of Runes and Flicker Wisp, and you just get a free meal. They show and tell or reanimate a Grizzlebrand, and you don't get to, dance around that at all. You just have to ram in and give them 7 life. Like, those are the Nightmare scenarios. But if Grizzlebrand's in play against your Delver deck, you've probably lost already. But you do lose some angles of, like, the block with Delver, bolt my own Delver to stop lifelink, win on the crackback. Like, things happen there that must attack deny. So it's not a huge drawback, but it is a drawback.
The only thing that I think I would add to that is that usually Blue Red Delver wants to be the aggressor. And if you're ever in a situation where you wanted to block, you're probably already losing. Like, these Delver shells are not meant to be playing defense, at least these sort of builds. So I think if you're ever in that situation, it likely didn't matter to begin with.
I think that's, I mean, like, while widely true, I think is, like, pretty reductive of the cost, because the point of these Delver shells, when they start adding cards like Expressive Iteration and Ethereal Forager, is so they can pivot onto, now I'm on D, let's rebuild for a minute and get those last 7 points across. Like, just deciding, like, pedal to the metal. Like, if I'm on D, I'm losing. Before you come in, I think doesn't give these decks enough credit for what they're actually doing.
For what it's worth, the lists that I've seen so far in chat groups and other places, Whale is not in them. Like, from what I've seen, it is 12 creatures. It is Delver Secrets, Dragon's Rage Channeler, and Sprite Dragon.
Sure. If you're already in the future metagame of what decks might look like, I'm talking about what Izzet Delver does now.
Okay.
And this, you're talking more like an is it prowess style versus like an is it Delver style. Like the modern deck is it prowess with like Swift Spear, Soulscar Mage, Stormwing Entity, Gutshot, like let's get in there. There is a legacy version of that, but this current dominating, 15% of the metagame Delver shell is a, pressure you early, pivot to card advantage in the mid game, get the last points across kind of shell, and the liquidity of Delver playing the role it needs to play is the strength of Delver, at least in recent years. Like the things that have cracked Delver to being too good are like the Deathrite Shaman, the Uro, or the Oko, the Dreadhorde Arcanist, and Expressive Iteration is, I mean, I don't think it's ban-worthy, but it's like in that conversation with things that pulled Delver out of its like 2011 Nimble Mongoose, let's get 20 across or bust mindset. So I think that this like 8/1 drop for a Sprite Dragon balls to the wall deck is just a different deck than what we're seeing right now.
I do also want to say that in the last month, I've probably seen more Delvers block than in any other metagame I've ever played in, because the Delver is the sacrificial lamb so that the Sprite Dragon can get another hit in later. I've come across that a lot, where someone blocks with the Delver and then crashes in for 5 or 6 with the Sprite Dragon to finish me off.
So this isn't in the show notes, but it's a thought that I've had. Something nice about Dragon's Rage Channeler is it's the first Delver threat in these blue-red Delver decks that's going to be see play, because like there are the prowess builds, but they're not as popular. That doesn't die to Pyroblast. It is not a blue creature. So like right now, Whale, Sprite Dragon, and Delver all die to Pyroblast. That is not true of Channeler, and I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, but it also like doesn't pitch to Force of Will. So like there's color advantages and disadvantages too.
They all die to Lightning Bolt, which, if you're playing Tarfire instead of Lightning Bolt, could be a huge problem in the mirror.
It's interesting. I like that.
Yeah.
So that brings us into our, is Delirium actually a steep cost? That's our next bullet point. And how much worse is Tarfire than Lightning Bolt, just on rate? Is getting this 3/3 into the air worth playing, Shock over Lightning Bolt? Because Shock doesn't see legacy play, folks. I'm sorry to disappoint you. But that card is much worse than Bolt. As far as pressuring Planeswalkers and that is a cost of Delirium.
Are we, for clarification, I think Brian is more talking Chain Lightning than actual Lightning Bolt. Like, I can't imagine people cutting actual copies of Lightning Bolt, but I could be wrong.
I mean, like, the lists have, one Chain Lightning in them? Maybe 2?
2's pretty standard, yeah.
So, I haven't run the numbers, but if we are going turbo, let's get this Dragon's Rage Channeler into the air, we want it on turn 2. If we're talking about, play this thing, play Mishra's Bauble, surveil, literally whatever that card is, crack Bauble, Tarfire you, in for 3. If that's the plan, I don't think you get to play 2 Tarfires. And that could, start eating into the Lightning Bolt range. Maybe 3 and 3 is what people end up with. And even on just Chain Lightning on rate, 2 is a lot less than 3.
I think what's weird about it specifically is I think in a vacuum, having one copy of a card that does 3 versus 2 is not that big of a deal. But in this world where you're going to play a shit ton of Delver Mirrors, if you're playing in something like, say, a Showcase Challenge or something like that, the fact that your removal spell won't eat a Dragon Rage Channeler that has Delirium is kind of a big deal.
Or if someone is still on Ethereal Foragers and you're not, we've talked about this on the pod in the past, the solution to grow was splash white, make it bigger. Back in the day, the solution to Is It Delver with Treasure Cruise was Jeskai Stoneblade with Treasure Cruise. You just go a little bigger, dance around what the level 0 obvious answer is, and just put some X3s in your deck if everyone's on Tarfire, and you'll start getting those points back. So the deck building is definitely a cost of Delirium.
I don't know if the two of you have seen it, but a few very intelligent minds have tweeted out over the last few days the showcase is this upcoming weekend. This episode will drop before then, but Callum Smith was one of them. Played Gutshot this weekend. Kills Dragon Rage Chandler, kills Delver Secrets, and kills the next card that we're going to talk about, Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. There's a lot of targets right now. Elves is also a tier 1 deck. It has a lot of
Allosaurus
targets.
Shepherd is strong.
Yeah, so Gutshot is a card people are expecting to play on their boards this weekend. This goes back into the conversation that Brian was just talking about, where is it good enough? Because sometimes this Chandler is going to come into play with 3/3. Is 1 damage, is that a steep cost for the mid game because it doesn't answer whale, that sort of thing. You'll be really ahead in the early game, but it's going to be maybe embarrassing late.
Yeah, this is a really interesting space to play in, and like Gutshot being a 0 mana thing that puts an instant in your graveyard and triggers your surveil. Like you could zap one of their things and make your thing a 3/3 with 1 spell. But again, we were just talking about the difference between 3 and 2 damage. The difference between 2 and 1, or even 3 and 1, is just horrendous. Like, you're going to look like a genius some percent of the time and a complete idiot some other percent of the time. And I suspect that things will just average out to we just play Lightning Bolt and over time and like stop getting cute. That's not to say that this card won't get played. It's just that I think that the early days where we see like 3 Bolt, 3 Tarfire are going to fall away pretty quickly. That's just my thought. Another sort of like mirror image of Delver and Dragon Rage Channeler are Delver always arrives as a 1/1, but once it flips, it's there. Delirium Rage Channel, Dragon Rage Channeler could arrive as a 3/3 if you're Delirious, but you could lose Delirium as a surprise. Like, attack, surgical extraction, block could be a thing that we see.
The old Tarmogoyf tricks.
Or just like, yeah, the old Tarmogoyf tricks, but instead of like going from 4/5 to 3/4, it's 1/1, no longer flying. Like, just block, like, just like Return to Nature, or there's a new green command that's like choose 2, make 2 squirrels, stifle a planeswalker ability, exile a card from a graveyard, gain 3 life. Like, just remove the weird card. Nip your Tarfire, block your idiot with my squirrel. Like, these are all, like, I would be really worried because Delirium is not easy to get. We've been talking about how we have to jump through hoops to it. How many artifacts and tribals are you going to play to make sure it sticks, like, through some spell? I don't know. I think that Delirium is going to be harder to get and keep than a lot of people think. Again, I'm not saying this card is bad. I think this card is good, but it's not just a 1 mana 3/3 flyer. There's a lot of work that has to go into it on both the deck building and the gameplay level to get it there and keep it there.
Yeah, we'll talk about a certain green card that is very sexy and might hose the ever-loving crap out of this card in a bit. I am so hot on Endurance. That card is great.
Let's pause that for a second. So I'm going to have a take here that I think Brian is going to disagree with based on his previous statement. But in my opinion, this is the best 1 mana creature printed for the Tempo archetype since Deathrite Shaman. I think Dragon Rage Chandler...
that's a pretty specific claim. Like, sure.
But
you can have
but
that
there's
one.
been so many. Hex Drinker, that top-aided a Grand Prix. Terramander. Like, there's been other things since then that have just not stuck around. I'm a real believer in Dragon Rage Chandler. I think the card's bananas.
So I think that bar is pretty low. I agree there are many things that have been printed, but like Terrible Mander, the real nickname. People tried that for like a week and then were like, oh, this card is unplayable. And to be fair, let's dig into this. The thing that Terramander needed to get big was a stocked graveyard, right?
Correct.
What other card meets that criteria? It's this one.
The difference was speed. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like Terramander needed 8 cards, maybe
8?
7.
Yeah, it's a million. It's like blue and 7 to evolve it.
I mean, that's pretty different. Like, you can have turn 2 active Delirium where that was always turn 4 or 5. The issue was timing. I would argue that Terramander was more on speed with Nimble Mongoose, where this is more on speed with Delver.
So I will push back a little there. I think nothing is on speed with Delver. I think that the rate at which Delvers are blind flipped will nothing like you can build your deck however you want. You're not going to flip or activate or become live, whatever you want to call it, as often as you flip Delver. So like if your opening hand has like Volcanic Island Delver this card, you're going to lead on Delver every single time.
That was going to be an upcoming question, but I agree. I would usually lead on Delver. That said, I don't think that this is that far behind it.
No, I think this is the closest thing we have to another copy of Delver. This is scary consistency in a deck that's already pretty darn consistent.
Yeah, I will definitely agree that this is the closest thing to playing 8 Delvers that the archetype's ever gotten. Though I will say I am softer on this than you guys are. I think it will be good, but I think that the deck building costs of what are you cutting for this? It's the Ethereal Foragers, it's the like Brazen Borrowers, it's the I don't know, True Name Nemesis. Does anyone play that card anymore? But you're cutting top end and like mid game for a even a heavier small game, and that sounds like we're going backwards in technology, not forward, because like the Nimble Mongoose, Stifle, Delver, those packages back 8 years ago, they aren't played anymore. So I think this deck is powerful, but I don't think that this is that much better than Monastery Swiftspear that we're going to get a totally rejuvenated archetype out of it.
I agree with half of your statement. I think the difference is that Expressive Iteration and specifically Sprite Dragon give you that little bit of extra mid-game. I think they give you a lot of mid-game. I don't think they give you great late game. So I think you have the insane early game and very good mid game. And if you can stall these decks out late, you will probably beat them. That said, you have to get to that late game in order to do that. And their early game is so strong where it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, the thing that you're losing is a different threat. Like in this 8/1 drop Force Bright Dragon deck, Fatal Push kills everything, no revolt required. Just like these sort of small 1-for-1 answers, just always get it. Abrupt Decay hits every single one of those things. Like you don't have like the Gurmag Angler that can't get Abrupt Decayed. You don't have the Ethereal Forager that can't get Fatal Pushed. Like so, presenting like different kinds of threats is as important as presenting more threats. So that's also like if Delver becomes Blue-Red Prowess, the answers can become mono 1-drop removal spells and check that. I think that we have an interesting metagame coming forward. Like I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that Brian thinks his card sucks, because that's just not true. I think it is good and it will be played, and it's something we're going to have to consider for a long time. But I don't think it is literally Delver 2.
I think we're going to have a spectrum of blue-red Delver decks. I don't think there will be one best build for at least the first month of its existence, because there are going to be people trying to play this like I want to be bigger than you game very consistently, and there's going to be other people who are trying to play the I'm trying to go under you game. And I think there's going to be various sizes of that deck that are appropriate for given weekends. And it's going to be really hard to tell based on one game which exact flavor of Delver you are going to be playing against. Because it's going to be a blue-red Delver deck, but some of them might be blue-red Delver with 12 1-drops, including Ragavan. Some of them might be much larger with the Ethereal Foragers. And those cards require very different responses.
That was going to be my next point. Some people might not be playing Dragon Rage Channeler at all. They might be on 4 Ragavan, and that's their game plan because nothing's defined yet. That said, as good as Ragavan is, I don't think it touches Channeler.
So we've seen this sort of split before. A few years ago, Blue-Red Delver was a hot deck, and Storm Chaser Mage was the new tech for it. And people realized that Storm Chaser Mage could not be supported in the same mana base as Wasteland. So if you saw Storm Chaser Mage, you didn't have to play around Wasteland, and vice versa. So like, I think those subtle cues will emerge over time, and we just, it's TBD what they are. And like, if you don't see a Channeler in game one, but your opponent casts Tarfire, like the jig is up. Or even Mishra's Bauble. Like, I think that there's going to be significantly more cues that your opponent has Channel in their deck than ever there was about Storm Chaser Mage and Wasteland back in the day. So I think we'll get some pictures, unless like if you go a whole game without seeing a Channeler, a Bauble, a Tarfire, or some like weird smoking gun that shouldn't be in the deck without Channeler, I think it will be reasonably safe to put them on not that version. So I think that will be less mysterious than we think. But again, let's see how it shakes out.
It's not guaranteed, but the versions with Expressive Iteration and Sprite Dragon, they're less likely to have Wasteland. It goes back to the needing blue-red, and Wasteland doesn't help you cast those. So I think we're more likely to see Fiery Islets in those builds, at least from what I've seen so far.
Right. So there will be hints. We'll get them.
Yeah. And then you're sitting there with your fetch land being like, can I get this Bayou right now? I don't think they have Wasteland, but if they do, I am screwed. And a lot of times you're just forced to play around it anyway.
Also, Stifle has dropped off quite a bit with Iteration. Just pointing that out as well.
Yeah, those cards don't go well together. Like as we've seen, as Delver Shells get better and lean into card advantage more, Stifle just drops off quickly because that card does not lend itself to long or even mid-sized games. Like, that is a 8-1 drop kind of card.
All right, are we ready to talk about the Monkey Pirate?
That was way longer than I thought we were going to talk about, Channeler. That was awesome.
That's all right. That's what we're here for. We're the ones going deep. We're not the ones doing every card. So let's talk about Ragavan, because I think this fits in with Channeler. I think these cards are in the same conversation.
It's almost unfortunate that they were printed at the same time, because this is one of those things where if either one of these had been printed independently, people would be testing the ever-loving crap out of them. And ultimately, one of these is probably going to be better than the other and largely force the other out of existence.
So you could argue that that's actually more fun, that you have to figure out which one of these or which combination of these is correct. But let me read this card before we talk about it too much. So Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer, is a 1 red mana, 2/1 Monkey Pirate legendary creature. When Ragavan deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token and exile the top card of that player's library. Until end of turn, you may cast that card. And it has dash for 1 and a red. Dash is you can cast it for its dash cost, it arrives with haste, and it's returned to your hand at the end of the turn. So the immediate just level 1, Bob Wong actually tweeted, "This is 1 mana Dreadhorde Arcanist," which so that is of course hyperbole. It might have been a troll tweet, I don't even know. I saw it for 1 second and dismissed it outright. But the comparison to Dreadhorde Arcanist, that is what we're here to talk about. So this is a 1 mana 2/1. If it connects, it generates card advantage and it generates mana advantage for sure, and might generate card advantage also. So and let's look at the numbers on this real quick. So if you're on the play, you cast this card. Your opponent just doesn't have a blocker or doesn't have a removal spell turn 1. You attack, you connect, you get your treasure, you have your land drop for the turn. You can cast up to a 3-drop off of their deck on turn 2. So the mana explosivity of this is insane. And like even if you just like ignore the fact that it exiles, Delver ramping is scary. Even if they're just like connect with this expressive iteration off the treasure, make my land drop off expressive iteration plus 2 cards, go. That's all obviously insanely powerful.
I have a deck building question for the two of you. this happens in other formats. So when I was testing for the Pro Tour, I was playing Dimir Rogues, and everyone was saying, hey, you need to be playing the Jund Tri-line, so that way if you steal your opponent's scavenging ooze, you can activate it. Well, with Ragavan, how deep do you go? Are treasure tokens enough? Or should you be playing like a random tropical island or a random tundra? Like, these are just questions I'm asking, but it opens up new deck space because then you could lean into things like engineered explosives. Like, there's things that you can do, or you can just stay, perfect mana base on blue red Delver. This is what I'm doing. But these are options that you have.
I don't think this is a card that you need to jump through too many hoops when you're playing with it. And honestly, the times where you don't hit a banger from your opponent's deck, you can just keep that extra mana around. Delver does well when it has more mana than you. Like, when they have the mana advantage, they get to set up the stuff that they want to set up. They can cantrip for the removal spell they want to cast. I don't think you need to go out of your way, because the cards that you're most likely to hit from your opponent's deck are blue, and like, you can cast those off your lands anyway. So it's only when you're playing against, your Death and Taxes or your Elves deck or something like that you start really running into cards that you might not be able to cast. And then, does it matter if you have to use your treasure to cast them? Probably not.
Yeah, the treasure does the work. Like, this card is just tailor-made to let you cast the card that you flip. Like, unless you connect and flip Palace Jailer, white, or Flicker Wisp with a white cost, that treasure is going to cast what you hit. Legacy is defined by its efficient mana cost. I guess if you're blue red and you hit Abrupt Decay, you're not casting that. Their cards have to cost off color, two colors that aren't in your deck. And we all know how I build Legacy decks, and I will not do anything that makes my mana base more susceptible to Wasteland than it has to be in any deck. So, no, I'm not putting a Tundra in my blue-red Delver deck, or a random Underground Sea. Just one of each. The full Arnold Palmer. Just cut all your basics, play all the duels.
What is it? Is it Reflecting Pool that is your opponent's lands? There's one of them that's your opponent's lands.
It's not Forbidden Orchard. It's Exotic Orchard.
Yeah, I don't want the Exotic Orchard for sure sick value.
Okay, so this is similar to my last question, but is it better to be a 3-color Delver deck than just blue-red Delver with Ragavan? Like, are you more likely to play this card if you're Grixis, for example, instead of Dragon Rage Channeler, because that extra color is available?
I think the most important thing with this card is just that you're playing a high density of removal that lets this thing get in. Like, if you are playing this card, you need to be able to connect with a 2/1 monkey every turn. It's just, absolutely critical to your plan. And so if the format is such that Lightning Bolt isn't going to be removing things, you need to be into a 3rd color to enable this thing.
Yeah, so there's more deck building tension there. So I think blue-red Delver, if you want to go full Ragavan, first of all, you have to play 4 of it, and it's a legend. That's already a deck building cost. Drawing multiple legends sucks. Blue-red, you get all your lightning bolts, chain lightnings, figure out where you want to go from there. And then you probably have to get into Vapor Snag and that sort of stuff. Maybe Suspend, which is another card from this set, which temporarily removes a creature. Lets you get in a couple more times. But once you get into Grixis or Rug, green doesn't help you remove creatures, so you probably have to be Grixis if we're having this conversation. And Delver, it's a 18-19 land deck. You keep 1-landers a lot of the time. If that 1 land is Underground Sea, sorry. Nice Ragavan. Nice 4 Ragavans in your deck. And if you cast this thing, even on turn 2, that's probably too late. Because unlike Dreadhorde Arcanist, which had the thickest ass imaginable, just 1/3 for some reason, also, it triggers on attack, not on connect. So you have this 2/1, dies to a Stiff Breeze, blocked by anything, chumped by anything. Just,
gut shot.
Shot through the gut, and you're too late. So, there's a lot of problems with Ragavan.
Caracas.
Also Caracas, Jesus. I can see sort of like the mid-game Ragavan being more interesting. So like we did the thought experiment of like, what if we want to just snowball with Ragavan every game? What if we put like 2 Ragavans in Grixis Delver, and so when we settle into that mid-game situation, we just dash when it's convenient, flip a card, maybe get a card, get some mana, and then like whoop, pick it back up. And then they have to respect that the rest of the game and all of their attacking and blocking decisions. Like, I think that's more interesting than this Turbo Ragavan deck that we just described. But again, is that better than just playing like Expressive Iteration or Painful Truths or Uro? Just be a different color, play Uro in your deck. Is that the engine we're looking for?
I do think there's one scenario where I actually like Ragavan, and it's that and this is going to sound weird because Delver decks currently don't do this, but as a sideboard option against combo and control decks, you could have 2 of this in your board. It's a 1-drop, so in those matchups you want to be aggressive. They don't have blocking creatures generally, so you're just naturally set up against these 2 archetypes where you don't need to have the removal. You can board out your additional copies of Chain Lightning or Lightning Bolt or whatever, and you just have this very efficient creature.
Yeah, I know Jarvis, when he top-8'd GP Atlanta in 2019, I know he was really big on just having 1 or 2 more 1-drops than the stock list had. He had Hexdrinker in his deck, and basically he was describing, like, the games where you're on board on turn 1 are just so different than the games that you're not. And we've all felt that, like, when our Delver opponents, like, land Ponder, and you're just like, oh, sweet relief. That's better. I just swung 20% in this matchup based on that one play. And that makes perfect sense, and Jarvis knows how to build legacy decks. So Ragavan could certainly be in the conversation for, like, I have 4 Delvers, and then, like, do I play a Hexdrinker? Do I play a Ragavan? Etc. Like, I think the dash makes this a defensible card to put in your deck as something short of a 4 of. Just being it, like, surprise damage, empty board, card advantage, like, all of that stacks up in a way that makes it more interesting than if it was just actually Jackal Pup with extra text.
There's also some worlds where you view this card as a way to accrue mana. Like, there's a lot of decks that really want to make the jump from, like, say 2 to 4 or something like that, and there may be some deck that emerges that just wants to connect with this a couple of times and then slam some bullshit red card a couple turns earlier. I don't know what that looks like yet. This is just kind of a passing thought. But with other red cards like, say, Goblin Lackey, the ability to cheat on mana in a red deck is valuable.
Right. I can't wait for Red Prison to adopt Cavern on Monkey for Simian Spirit Guide and this monkey. Or isn't Spirit Guide an ape? It's not even a monkey.
I believe it is an ape spirit.
Wow, what a blowout. I'm off it. I hate that idea. I'm mad now. I want to quit Magic.
Poor goblins, though. We're over here talking about gut shots, and they're just over there trying to play defenseless goblin lackeys.
I will never agree to the statement of poor goblins. They had their time in the sun. They've existed as long as any legacy deck. Like, that was a type 1/5 deck, and then it became a legacy deck.
The best deck in Historic for a while.
Yep. It got second place at GP Flash. Flash was legal, and Goblins got second place in that tournament. Like, come on. I do not feel bad for Goblins. Like, it's okay that it's not tier 1 anymore, because that deck has a history that very few other Magic decks can compete with. So, no poor Goblins. Gut shot that lackey. Get the fuck out. Is there more to say about Ragavan?
That's what I was going to ask. Do we want to talk about Phil's favorite card?
Oh yeah, let's get going on that. But before we do, I just want to say, Ragavan is totally a card of a power level where if someone puts together the right 75 and, you know, breaks the monkey, it could be very strong. But I am more excited about Dragon Rage Channeler than I am about this card currently by quite a bit.
It could also go into Pirate Tribal.
Yes.
That's true. Make it blue-red instead of mono-blue. All right, let's talk about Endurance. I love this card.
I also love this card.
I am not in love with this card.
I mean, I wrote half a page of show notes on this, so you don't have to be.
Good.
All right. It's 1 and 2 green for an elemental incarnation. It's a 3/4 with flash and reach. When it ETBs, up to one target player puts all of the cards from their graveyard on the bottom of their library in a random order. And it also has evoke, and you can evoke it for exiling a green card from your hand. This is part of a cycle of cards that do the same thing. So, as a starting point, this is a graveyard hate sideboard option for green decks, but I think this is only scratching the absolute surface level of what this card can do. I think this card is absolutely insane, and if this was a normal, non-Modern Horizons, Modern Masters, whatever you want to call it, power level set, I think this easily would have been in contention for the best card in the set for an Eternal format purpose.
It's very versatile.
Yeah. It's like Green Sun level of versatility. This card is very strong.
I'd like to clarify, me saying that I was not in love with this card is just me being upset that it exists. I'm going to have to play around this card, and I don't like it.
Yeah, this is like a green creature that you have to be worried about as instant speed, and that's terrifying. Because normally, like, the green deck passes the turn after playing a fucking Llanowar Elf, and you're like, ha, you're dead, idiot. Game 2.
I'm mostly worried about Modern, where I'm, like, trying to play Underworld Breach and stuff, and, like, there's no way of knowing if your opponent has this. It's just they either have it or they don't. Like, there's no signals or tells. Like, I don't know. That's just another thing that you have to think about. And free Magic the Gathering cards, just hate them. Unless they're in my deck, then I love them.
They've never been a problem before in the past. I don't know where I can't even do that.
Yeah, you understand
What's a
we're
Phyrexian
hosting
mana?
a legacy podcast right now. Free spells are kind of our thing.
All right, so let's start with the graveyard hate ability. We have a Tormod's Crypt-ish level card.
What was that creature? Not Loam Dryad. Loaming Shaman.
Loaming Shaman.
That's what it was.
Yeah, all right. So we have a Loaming Shaman at a Tormod's Crypt cost, but it's an instant. So you get to just cast the cards that you want to be casting, and you can still promote whatever your primary game plan is, and you don't telegraph this card. When you play like a Tormod's Crypt out or a Relic of Progenitus out, you are telegraphing, this is the graveyard hate I have. Can you beat this? Can you make me pop this? With Endurance, you're not doing that. You're just playing cards, and then your opponent goes for something, and you just get to no sir or no ma'am them, and just absolutely blow
This
them
is in
out.
the show notes a little bit later, and I'm sorry, Phil, for jumping ahead, but Maverick finally has an answer to Doomsday. Your opponent sacrifices that Lion's Eye Diamond, they put that Oracle on the stack, you blow them out. They're not coming back from that. So Doomsday's finally getting some main deck hate against it. That said, Phil, this is not a Death and Taxes card. So it is
Sure isn't.
nod towards Maverick, which is normally when new cards are printed, they tend to share them. This is a Maverick specific card, which is sort of interesting.
Yeah, and I love that this solves the Maverick problem of playing against combo. Usually when you're playing Maverick, you just get to interact on your turn at sorcery speed. Whether it's you're an Abzan build and you're thought seizing, or you're playing a Deafening Silence, most of the interaction that you have is at sorcery speed. And this is an instant that people have to respect or they will lose to it.
So I just glanced over this, Phil, but this is a main deckable card. Like, this doesn't need to be a a sideboard card. And people might be listening to this going like, well, why is it a main deckable card? Like, Graveyard Hate isn't applicable to every single deck in the format. Well, a lot of decks have some graveyard abilities, even Miracles, they have their fetch for a Mystic Sanctuary or whatever. But even let's pretend your opponent has nothing. Even Delver decks, this is going to mess with Delirium. We just talked about Dragon Rage Channeler. Let's pretend none of that's in play. It is still a 3/4 with Flash. And Reach. Phil, name the creatures that this is going to blow out of the water.
Fucking every creature in Death and Taxes is just gonna fucking die to this card. Your Wisp is dead, your Evoker is dead, your Thalia is dead, your creature that has a couple of counters from a Luminarch Aspirant probably still dies or trades with this. Like, it eats a Delver, it eats a Dragon Rage
Ragavan.
Channeler. Like, this is a thick creature.
Yeah, 3/4 is an enormous booty on this thing, and 3 mana is entirely castable. Like, most of this Elemental Incarnation cycle costs like 4 and 5 to actually get into play, which is, you know, in a game of Legacy, like, might happen if your deck's built that way, but green decks are going to get to 3 mana. Like, this could pop off a Llanowar Elf on turn 2 or a Noble Hierarch. Like, you attack... So, like, okay, I'm on the play. Noble Hierarch, go. You, Delver, go. Me, land, go. You, flip Delver, attack. Eat your Delver. Go to my turn, attack for 4. GG. Like, wow. And, like, no, Lightning Bolt's not going to help you. So, like, this card just on stats. Like, on... Like, the ability, like, the evoke ability, the fact that you can 2-for-1 yourself to do this for free, I think is medium. Like, if it didn't have all the other words on it, I think that card kind of sucks. Like, it's just like a weird Ravenous Trap or like a kind of different, like, card like that. But the fact that you have this 3/4 body against Death and Taxes, like Phil just said, but it's also this Ravenous Trap against Oops All Spells, and this, your deck has cards in it now against Doomsday. Like, the specific words on this could have exiled a graveyard, but it didn't. It put cards from the graveyard back into the deck. So this looks like a development card. So what I mean by that is that there's a design and development in card design, where design are like, these are our neat ideas, and development is like, now we're going to make them playable. But some cards are created by development to solve specific problems that exist in Magic the Gathering. Like, Great Sable Stag is very much a development card because fairies was a problem for a year and a half. So this is like, okay, what boxes can we check for eternal formats, period? And they're like, Delver, check. This thing didn't need to have reach, but they put it on there. Get rid of graveyards? Sure. Let's make it free. Like, there's a lot of reason to do that. But how are we going to get rid of the graveyard? What are we going to do about Doomsday? Oh, what if we can put cards back in the deck? Like, this... I feel like people sat around a conference table and just, like, shit all over everything that could be considered a problem in eternal formats and just jammed it onto one card. And I mean that... When I say shit all over, I mean, like, everyone who's trying to do some BS, this is going to check a box for them. But I don't think that this card is outrageous. Not any more than, like, you know, Force of Negation or Mindbreak Trap or Ravenous Trap or Leyline of the Void. Like, I don't think this just checks a lot of boxes, but it doesn't, like, check all of them in ways that cards don't already do. You just get all of them in one spot, which is very exciting.
I have a weird metagame question for the two of you. So typically Hogak decks tend to be the blue bullies. Like, these decks, you know, they crush Rug Delver, they crush control decks, all that good stuff. And they're getting a new tool with Grief. So we're expecting them to see, you know, a lot of play now. Grief would be the black version of Endurance. I think it exiles a card, not discards.
Yeah, you exile a black card to cast the let me pull it up so I don't lie to people. But it's functionally unmask, but it's on a creature. Like, you evoke the creature instead of cast a sorcery, but it does the same thing that
Okay,
unmask
so we're
does.
expecting Gak to come back.
All right, I've got it up.
All right, Phil's got it.
All right, so it's 2 colorless, 2 black for a 3/2 elemental incarnation with menace. When it ETBs, target opponent reveals their hand, you choose a non-land card from it, that player discards that card.
Okay, so it's discard.
Right. Yeah, you exile the black card as a cost. It makes your opponent discard. So it's not quite unmask, because you can unmask yourself in certain situations, but it's very close to unmask.
So we're expecting Gak to go up and play. Gak is a deck that bullies these blue decks. Is Endurance existing negative in that aspect that this card is going to wreck a deck that currently beats the blue decks. Like, yes, it is a tool against blue decks itself, but do we see this being somewhat harmful in that aspect, or is it just a net positive all around?
I've never found Graveyard Hate to be particularly great against Hogak, as weird as that sounds. The deck's oddly good at playing around a single piece of Graveyard Hate. It's when you really start bodying them with, like, the second one after clearing their board or something like that, that things start to get problematic. But, like, one Surgical doesn't end Hogak. One Tormod's Crypt doesn't end Hogak. They'll just continue to do their thing if you give them time. So, like, this is a card that's good against Hogak. Maybe this is a card that even sees play in Hogak at some point. But I don't think that this is the silver bullet that kills them by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. To beat Hogak, you basically need a Rest in Peace Leyline of the Void level hate piece, or like Grafdigger's Cage, backed by the ability to beat a board full of creatures. Like, you need to beat a bad Delver start, and you need to have a, like, serious graveyard hate piece at the same time. And Endurance, if you get up to that 3 mana, like, nuking their graveyard while, blocking... I mean, trading off with a Vengevine isn't the worst thing you could do. You could just, like, block Bloodghast for a while. Unfortunately, all those cards are just going to come back. Like, there's no permutation of triggers where you get to eat that creature in combat and then shuffle it away with Endurance. But, I mean, Endurance is not a legend. You could play 4 of these if you want. And just
Oh, baby, I want.
Yeah, and like, it does just gum up the board in a meaningful way. Like, maybe the first Endurance nukes their graveyard, trades with a Vengevine. The second one eats the Vengevine and starts blocking Bloodghast and sticking around. So those are things you can do. But I really don't think... Well, for one, I don't think Grief is going to increase Hogak's meta share, because Unmask is already a card. Like, this is not a unique effect for Legacy. It's a unique effect for Modern, where Unmask isn't a card. But
the difference is that in Hogak it triggers a Vengevine.
And Bridge from Below.
Yeah, I mean, those are good things, but, like, I don't expect anyone who wasn't already playing Hogak to be like, hell yeah, this is what I was waiting for.
I do agree with that.
It is an upgrade, but I'm not expecting a giant spike in Hogak. And I'm not expecting Endurance to be the answer to it, if there is that spike either.
So we're kind of talking about it as a way to fight unfair decks right now with things like Hogak. But up until maybe a week ago, Uro was one of the most popular things that was happening in the format. Like, those sorts of cards are going to, wax and wane and become popular. And this is just a nice main deckable way to clear the graveyard for fair stuff, whether it's Delve or Escape or Snapcaster targets.
Yeah, and control decks aren't very fast with putting cards to their graveyard. So if you, Endurance them once, you might have just bought yourself 5 time walks. It's a lot of fetch lands to replace.
Yeah, and on that note, like, this puts cards back into their library, right? And there's going to be some weird scenarios where you filter a whole bunch of, like, bad draws back into your opponent's deck.
Yeah, so it does smartly put them in a random order on the bottom of the deck. It's not a full shuffle. So, like, you can't use this to, like, snipe a Terminus. Like, if your Miracle's opponent, like, Brainstorm's end step goes to their turn, you can't, like, force a shuffle. So there is that. It also doesn't just throw all the cards into the card draw pool again, like Phil just said, but once they fetch or shuffle some other way, those cards will be live to draw again.
Yeah, it's not an immediate thing. It's like, I am settling in for a 20-turn game, and I just put 6 fetch lands back into your deck on turn 11, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
I also think this card gets better as more graveyard-based stuff is going on, or the graveyard stuff gets more powerful. I'm no Vintage expert. I play Vintage somewhat casually in the grand scheme of things, but I imagine that this card will see Vintage play as well.
Oh yeah, easily. This affects a lot of things in Vintage in meaningful ways. It avoids Thorn of Amethyst because it's a creature. I mean, Thalia is not super popular, and Thorn is restricted, but like those cards do come up.
And the fact that it's green means that it's very easy to find cards to pitch to it in the Hogak deck.
Yeah, the Gak deck that has Vengevine, and it's already playing Force of Vigor, and this is just like another green. Like if you have like this card and Force of Vigor in your hand, either one can pitch to the other depending on what you need. That's all pretty exciting. I mean, free spells are going to get played in Vintage one way or the other. And I think this one's actually pretty good.
And unlike some of the other cards that we've been talking about, like Ragavan, like you can play this card in multiples and it's great. Like you draw multiple, one pitches to the other, and that's fine. You draw multiple, okay. I pitched one to buy time early on. The second one is just a hate card that I hard casted. And they're just 3/4s. Like they just beat. At the end of the day, like this card is just solid all around.
Burning Tree Shamans.
Yes. There's also some weird stuff that can happen with this card. Notably, this does say target player. So you can choose to target yourself if that's something you need to do. That should be a rarity, but like Painter is a deck. Like you could get Grindstoned and then flash this thing in, put some cards on top of your deck again, and like survive for another turn and crack for lethal. Or like one of your key cards got countered and you only have one of it, you can put it back in your deck and green sun it out. There's times where that phrasing may be relevant.
Or in a control mirror and you're just getting close to decking. Like that does happen. On Magic Online, you tend to time out before you deck, but in real life, like the Miracle's Mirror, maybe some Surgicals have popped off, the Uros are gone, nobody really has a win con left, and like you're both down to like 10 and 12 cards. This could just reset that whole game.
So summing it all up, so this is a Graveyard Hate card, Delver Hate card, Combat Trick, Oh Shit button versus Thassa's Oracle deck. It does a lot. I expect to see this as a multiple of in many sideboards. And I know Julian said he wanted to test 4 of these in an Elves sideboard, for example. So expect to see a lot.
Anything that makes Oops All spells worse, I'm usually for.
I did 4-win a league earlier today. My only loss was to Oops. So I'm in for Endurance. Let's go. Serious question, though. If you have Endurance versus Oops, do you shuffle in response to the Oracle trigger or in response to the Dread Return?
Do they only play one of each? I'm trying to figure out if it matters. Can they cast an Oracle? Probably off Lotus Petals, so I think you would do it with the Oracle trigger on the stack.
Okay. I mean, that leaves them with a 1/3 in play. Does that matter? Though, I guess you definitely do it. I haven't considered this. This wasn't a trap. I was just like, it came up in my brain. So I think you definitely respond to the Oracle trigger, because then if they reset and respy themselves, though I guess that doesn't matter, because then they can just therapy the Oracle back into the bin and Dread Return it again. So I'm trying to think of, like, can you catch the Oracle? Like, where is it worse for the Oracle to be?
Well, they only have one Dread Return, so they can't Dread Return again.
They have 2 sometimes.
Really? Okay.
The list I lost to today had 2, I promise. We can check the tapes. It was my Dead Guy L League. It should be out the same day as this podcast, I think. But I looked at their list. They had 2 therapies, 2 Dread Returns, 1 Bridge from Below, like a tight little package. So, I don't know. Your mileage may vary. I guess, though, either way, though, the spy will have triggered already, and you get to look at their whole deck and just make the decision that's right for you in that moment.
Yeah.
So if they only have 1 return, then you probably respond to the Dread Return, and then they can never Oracle again. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I still think you do it with the Oracle trigger on the stack, because otherwise, like, theoretically, they can cast it off Petals.
All right, fair enough. So we're going to do an offshoot episode of delving into only this topic, the deep dive of the deep dive. We're going to do a Charizard episode talking about exactly when to interact with Thassa's Oracle decks. We'll look for that in the future. Don't actually look for that. It's not happening.
All right, Brian, I know you're excited for our next card here. Why don't you start us off?
Yeah, this is... among the weirdest cards that have ever been printed, and it was one of the first cards previewed, and the preview season's been so crazy that I feel like a lot of people have forgotten about it. And I'm talking about Urza's Saga. This is a throwback to the set called Urza Saga, but now it's a card, because Saga is now a creature, or a card type, and Urza has one. So
can I pause you, Brian?
Yes.
I think the only reason, or I shouldn't say the only reason, the primary reason you like this card is that it fits into your Urza's tribal theme. You love Urza.
I love Urza so much. Like, absolutely love Urza. I've had some tournament success with Urza, and I just get along with that card. It does things I want to do in Magic.
You've probably read about Urza. You were really big into the books.
Oh yeah, I know everything there is to know about Urza, from lore. Also, I have already decided that no matter what sweet tokens are printed in the future, if I win another Star City Invitational, I'm going to be a 0/0 construct token. Like, that's just a lock. I don't care when it happens. That's my plan. Okay, so Urza Saga. This is an enchantment land - Urza Saga. Soak it in, kids. It is an enchantment land. So it does not have a mana cost, so you play it like a land. You can use it. You can do it as long as you have a land drop still available and you have priority on your own turn, and the stack is empty. So all of the rules about normally playing a land are true here. It is a 3-chapter saga. So the way sagas work is that when it enters the battlefield and after your draw step each turn, so that's the beginning of your main phase, you add a lore counter to it. And the number of lore counters on it is the chapter it's on. So chapter 1 is Urza Saga gains tap, add a colorless. So you play this card, it instantly triggers, puts a lore counter on it, you can tap it for 1. So it's a waste on the first chapter. The second chapter is 2 tap, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So that's the construct, the Urza construct, etc. We've seen more and more of these things around. This is not an ability you can usually activate on your second turn. Like if you turn 1 Urza Saga, turn 2, you need 2 mana plus the Saga to make the construct. So this is probably not going to be a land you play on turn 1. And then chapter 3 is search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost 0 or 1 and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. And you sacrifice the Saga when its final chapter resolves. So you lose a land. It costs you a land to do this, but you replace it with this 0 or 1 mana artifact. So important rules thing to get into real quick before we talk about the implications of this card. Urza Saga Chapter 3 says, with mana cost 0 or 1. It does not say mana value 1 or less. So the card has to actually have a printed mana cost of 0 or 1. So that rules out Lotus Bloom, Mox Tantalite, those sort of things that don't have a printed mana
X
cost.
artifacts as well.
Yeah, X artifacts. So you can't get Chalice of the Void even on 0. You can't get artifact lands. So I'm sure that came up in a development meeting as well. It's like, okay, this can't get Lotus Bloom. Deal. So that's how they worked around that. So this card is weird.
It's brilliant.
So weird.
It's
Like,
amazing.
you could tell so much thought it went into this card.
Yes. And I think this is one of those cards that has like an 80% chance of being cool that it exists, and some decks are going to like it, and otherwise just be a cool thing that exists, and 20% chance that it's horrifically broken and needs to be banned. And I don't think it's going to hit that one in Legacy. I've heard some rumblings about Modern, but I think all of those are just like, I haven't seen a list yet. I've just heard rumblings about like this card being silly. But okay, so let's talk about what this card, where it can go. So it slots kind of cleanly into what decks like Urza Echo and Bomberman are already doing. Like Urza Echo has this beatdown side plan, like you're busy respecting my combo, I'm going to crunch in with my constructs, and this is another way to make constructs. It tutors up the Lion's Eye Diamond in Chapter 3, and both of these decks want Lion's Eye Diamonds in play. So that's a pretty clean show up for that. The question is, what deck building space are you putting it in? Because those are also Ancient Tomb, City of Traders decks, so they want more mana, and this is a land that sacks itself after 2 turns. So there's going to be some deck building tension there, but those are the cleanest, just plug and play applications.
It's hard though, because those decks also want colored mana, and this is a colorless producing card. So like there is a real cost of this card.
Right. Yeah. It is. It's not free. It just if you're looking for a place that is ready to open it would embrace it with open arms without building a new deck, I would start there. And probably Bomberman more than Echo, but they do a lot of similar things. Chapter 3 does almost everything Trinket Mage can do. Like we talked about, Trinket Mage is 1 or less, and this is 1 or 0 specifically, so it would be too easy if you could just cash in your Urza Saga, like, oh, I still need mana, I'll just get Seed of the Synod. So, like, even ignoring the absolute bustedness of Lotus Bloom, like, just turning it into a sticky artifact land, still too easy. So, there's a lot of cards in Legacy. If you've been playing a while, you might remember that Trinket Mage was once a playable card in this format. Like, you could actually just cast Trinket Mage, and you have, like, a Tormod's Crypt, a Pithing Needle, a Seed of the Synod, like, just a little spread of, 4 or 5 artifacts that you can pick and choose. So all of those are still available. Like, you could... I didn't compile the complete list, but just off the top of my head, Grafdigger's Cage, Silent Gravestone, Nile Spellbomb, Lotus Petal, Lion's Eye Diamond. So there are certainly playable cards. Pithing Needle, of course, is a big one. And important to note, another rules nuance here. If Chapter 3 resolves, the artifact is in play. So if you're like, trigger Chapter 3, your opponent says, okay, then you go get Pithing Needle. It's in play. You get to name something. They don't get to respond. So, surprise, your fetch lands are gone. Or, too bad, you didn't get to activate that thing. So, keep that in mind.
I like that.
It can result in some really scary surprises. I saw a couple of lists floating around with, surprise, surprise, Phyrexian Dreadnought. Just like, okay, I tutor my 12/12, I stifle the trigger, oh no. That's certainly in the too cute category, but that's the sort of design space that you're working with.
I was told I was crazy when this card was spoiled, but I said that it was a possible sideboard option for TES. We were already playing Mishra's Bauble. I said, well, we have the possibility of activating this on turn 2 because of, we play 6 Moxen. And then you can actually activate it again with the 3rd chapter on the stack to make another construct. And TS has so many artifacts, we could do the pseudo Karn Echoes thing against Delver or control decks. The issue is that A, it's colorless, and B, Wasteland is already a card that's really good against TES. But I do think that I'm going to get a couple of these and put them into my maybe one day deck space because it's certainly really powerful.
Yeah, very cool. Very unique card. So I put this a little later in the notes, but since we're already on it. So single cards that tutoring up could really pay off certain decks. We talked about LED. Opal or Amber are also in the conversation. Voltaic Key. Every single business card in Lantern Control. The Lantern of Insight, the Codex Shredder, the Ghoul Color Bell. Like, I know that's a modern deck that's mostly fallen off, but if that deck has legs, this is going to be involved. Phyrexian Dreadnought we've mentioned. Grindstone. Altar of the Brood is a kill condition in some various combo decks. Pox homies, the Rack and Curse Scroll are both 1-mana artifacts. Candelabra of Tawnos, and maybe even Colossus Hammer. Like, Hammer Time is a modern deck, and this is another way to get that hammer into play. So that's just like off the top of my head. Like, I had 5 minutes putting notes together before we started recording tonight, and those are all like things that you want. Like, if you built your deck with those cards in them, they're cards you want in play. So those are all like the very level 1 cool tutor targets. I'm about to get weird with you though. So this can represent repeatable endgame threats in combination with something like Crucible or Loam. Like Bryant said, each Urza Saga represents 2 constructs over the course of 3 turns. So if you get into those grindy Loam games where like Ports and Wastelands and whatever have done their thing, or you're just in Shark still even, and like you have this, you could play like one of these in Shark still, and it's kind of like a 5th Shark Typhoon for that end game situation, like another way to pay off Crucible. That those could slot into decks like that, or it could spawn a whole new archetype, like Artifact Control, Artifact Prison, and that's just how they win. Like they just have 10 spheres in play, and Crucible this thing will kill you eventually. Lands has crop rotation. It's a land. You can crop rotate for this thing. Like get it on the end step. It immediately triggers chapter 1. Untap, you're in chapter 2 immediately. Here's a construct. The deck also has some artifacts in it. Like it plays Mox Diamond already. You could add a prison package. Like you could play a Pithing Needle. You could play a Grafdigger's Cage. I don't know if these decks want it, but you can do it.
I don't even think you have to get cute there. I just think you play a couple of these, and just the ability to pivot early. Like conceptually, when people think about lands, they think like about a control combo deck or something along those spectrum. And this gives you the ability to just say, I'm going to crap a creature, I'm going to crap another creature, I'm going to send them both sideways, and then I'm going to loam and make more creatures. And you actually get some draws where you are the beatdown, which is very unusual for that deck. I think this card is going to see at least testing in lands for sure.
Yeah, and it seems low cost. The questions are between Dark Depths and Field of the Dead. Does it plug a hole the deck has? Like those two things kind of represent what this card's already doing. I think that unless you're getting some value out of Chapter 3, like even if it's just like you play literally any spell bomb and just cantrip off of Chapter 3, like I don't know. I'm not a lands expert, but these are all things that are on the table. Maverick already plays Knight of the Reliquary and Ramanep Excavator. So if you like toolboxes in your toolboxes, you can tutor for this, get it into play, make some constructs, and then Ramanep it back in. That's a thing you can do. Yavimaya is a card we haven't talked about yet. It's Urborg, but green. Like all lands in play are forests. You can pick up your Urza Saga with Quirion Ranger and just refire it over and over again. Just like let Chapter 3 trigger, pick it up in response, get your artifact, play it for the turn. Boom, boom. Like that's pretty cool. This could trumpet the return of Stax as an archetype. Stax is largely replaced by all of the other better prison decks these days, but this could happen. That's what I had. Just off the top of my head, I'm excited about the possibilities. Like I'm not going to pretend I understand the complete ramifications of this card. I think there's a lot of cool things here. I think there, like I said, some archetypes could play with it without warping too much. So, and it might spawn brand new archetypes. And I'm leaving the door open that it's completely busted in half.
Well, I don't know if I heard you say this, but it's certainly playable in Vintage and PO. Just like that deck's already playing 15, 16, 17 artifacts. Those constructs are going to be very, very scary. And it's a free win condition. Like you have to do so little work in order to make it that an effective thing. So that's pretty interesting to me. And then Brian, you've been playing Magic forever, just like I have. I'm sure you remember the Stalking Stones win condition control decks.
Oh yeah.
This could be not necessarily Legacy, but maybe Historic or somewhere else. This could be that sort of effect where this is your Stalking Stones and you just win with, these late game. You don't play real win conditions. You just win with these pseudo man lands.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a thing you can do. I have played my share of control decks that only had Urza's Factory to win with. Just the 7 mana make a 2/2 land from Time Spiral. Like, I've done that. And this is a more realistic win condition than those are. You can tutor it with Tolarian Academy, or not Tolarian Academy, Tolaria West, by the way. Just thought of that. There's so much going on here. And it's an enchantment. Like, we haven't even talked about, like, Enchantress stuff. Like, this doesn't trigger any Enchantress because you don't cast it. It just enters the battlefield.
Isn't there one of them that it's an enchantment ETBs? Like, one of the ones that's stapled to a creature?
It will trigger Constellation.
Yes.
The static, or the... it's not a static ability. Like
triggered ability.
Constellation. It will trigger Constellation, it will not trigger the traditional when you cast an enchantment, draw a card enchantresses. So it does trigger Constellation. You can tutor it with Sterling Grove. You could rumble in with your Destiny Spinner. Just like get in there. I don't know. Like, this is so weird. Nothing like it has ever happened.
Yeah, and on that note, it's also a land that is vulnerable to enchantment destruction, which, while there's not a ton of that running around main deck, it'll occasionally happen.
Yeah,
like
I would
your
not...
land gets Rex Saged or something.
Yeah, or just wilt. Yeah, that's no bueno. It cannot be abrupt decayed though, because it is a land, even though it is an enchantment. So lots of weird stuff going on here.
Yeah, and just another low-hanging fruit that we didn't touch on. In Vintage, this can also just tutor your Lotus up every game if you were to play this up as a 4-of. Oddly, you probably wouldn't want to actually do that in, say, a Workshops deck, because your Workshop mana doesn't actually... It can't pay for the activated ability that gives you constructs.
Right, but I mean, Golos Shops is, I think, the premier version of Shops right now, and Golos can just yeet this thing right into play. So, and that's a Crucible deck all day long. Like, your plan is to eventually strip lock your opponent with Crucible. So now, I mean, Golos gets the job done quick enough. This might be win more. In fact, I'm pretty confident that it is win more in that shell, but just being able to chuck it into play off of Golos is nice.
It seems like a low-cost one of there, at the very least.
The Golos decks are also usually Dark Depths decks at the moment as well. So it's going to be fighting for spots. But yeah, as a one-of, it's absolutely free. There's also some interesting design space in Breach decks because it's a backup win con. And it tutors for your Lotus, which are two things you always want in that deck.
Yeah, that's true.
So Brian, I know that there's one card that you were really excited to talk about that wasn't our big four for today. It's Void Mirror.
Yeah. Yes. So let me read Void Mirror for everyone. Let me find it, pull it up real quick. Of course, the spoiler isn't in alphabetical order. Okay, I found it. Void Mirror, 2-mana artifact. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no colored mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. So, on the surface, this hoses mud decks, like Vintage Shops, Eldrazi in Legacy, 12 Post, like that's like the surface level. You get a little below the surface, 0 mana cards. Lotus Petal, obviously no mana was spent on it. Bryant is making a big sad face on our video chat right now. But so this is like functionally a Chalice on 0, and it's also functionally kind of a Lavinia, like Force of Will, pitch cast, Force of Negation pitch cast, any of the new elementals, Phil's Boy Endurance. Like if you pitch cast any of these cards, they're countered. So there's a lot going on here. It's a pseudo defense grid and a pseudo Chalice on 0, with applications against decks that are naturally colorless. So there's a lot of pieces to this, and much like we talked about Endurance, where like any one of the things Endurance does isn't good enough to put in a deck, but once they're like all together, you get a pretty robust card. I have seen some visceral reactions to Void Mirror's printing, like angry quit magic level reactions from people who, like, basically the entire Vintage Workshop community is like, really, Wizards, are we that evil? What did we do to you? And
the ban list is what you did. Look at it.
Right. So
or this restricted list, I'm sorry.
Yeah, like, we don't even need to get into the fact that dozens of artifacts have died for Mishra's Workshop sins on the Vintage restricted list. Like, there's some embarrassing cards that are restricted in Vintage because Workshop is allowed as a 4-of. But so even let's assume that your deck is ostensibly monocolorless. This does not say counter any colorless spell. It says counter any spell that colored mana wasn't used to cast it. So in Vintage Shops, Tolarian Academy and the 5 colored Moxen are in every single list. So there's at least 6 colored sources of mana that you can just cast your spells with through that. We go into Legacy. colorless Eldrazi, plays Cavern of Souls. It usually plays Spirit Guide of some variety. Like you can
Urborg
filter
is
some
somewhat
color.
common as well.
I was just about to say
Urborg.
that Caracas.
Yeah, Urborg, Karakas, Bajuka Bog. These are all cards that are played in, quote, colorless decks. And so there's some amount of the time where your blue opponent will jam this Void Mirror, turn off their own Force of Wills, and then stop nothing out of you. Like, the blue player, we're assuming it's blue, the player who plays Void Mirror to try to stop a colorless deck has to do it on turn 1 on the play. Once it's even, if you're even on the draw and they get to put their Moxen down, this card doesn't do anything anymore, except turn off your own forces. And the ways to get Void Mirror into play early on turn 1, because it's a 2-drop, generally are affected by Void Mirror. So, I mean, the dream scenario is you just go like, Volcanic Island, Mox Sapphire, cast this. You were going to make that play anyway, go. But that turns off any subsequent Moxen in your deck. If you're playing Ancient Tomb to power this thing out, Ancient Tomb decks generally aren't going to work well with Void Mirror. And this one is mercifully symmetrical, unlike most printings of the last 3 or 4 years. This one is when a player casts a spell. So, unless the individual pieces of this, like, add up to something worth a deck slot, I just don't think this card is going to see much play after the first month or so. I think people are going to realize this isn't doing what I need it to, and we're going to see it drift away. And anyone who quit Magic and sold their workshops because this card was printed, sorry, you've made a huge mistake. Like, Defense Grid can go in any deck. It's an artifact. How many decks do people play Defense Grid in? It's like close to 0. Chalice of the Void can go in any deck.
I am sitting right here, Brian.
Well, you're the only one. So Defense Grid, in the scheme of decks, it serves a very specific purpose in a very specific type of deck. Like any random deck. Like, Phil, you could put that in Death and Taxes and not worry about Force of Wills anymore. But you don't do that because it's not worth a card slot. And Chalice of the Void, you could play that card in any deck. It's an artifact. You could play it for 0, which is 2 less mana than Void Mirror costs to get the same effect. And people don't do that. So unless the stars align and the individual bits of, like, Defense Grid's not good enough, Chalice is not good enough, but what if it's both? Like, that's the only area where this card becomes playable to me, and I just don't think we're going to clear that bar. And this is one of those Opposition Agent spoiler freakout moments where Opposition Agent turned out to be terrible, and I think Void Mirror is going to be closer to Opposition Agent than it is to Deafening Silence.
Yeah, I think this card will see some vintage play, I think, for that first week or two. And there are going to be some games where it resolves on turn 1, and that is it. That is the game. But I don't think that is going to be strong enough on average and consistent enough on play versus draw to actually be worth having in your deck.
Yep. Like, it has to arrive on turn 1 on the play, like I said. And the cards that let you power this out on the play are bad once it's in play. So subsequent Moxen are terrible. And if you want a high enough density of these to have it in your opening hand, you're probably not playing 1. And the second copy's dead, if it would even resolve through your own Void Mirror. So I just don't, it just doesn't line up in a way that makes sense against anything. I think that we're going to see some screenshots of turn 1 Void Mirrors on the play, and then we're going to see even more screenshots of turn 1 Void Mirror on the draw when the opponent already has a Mox in play, and it's just a blank piece of cardboard. And that's how I feel about that card.
I feel like we've rambled on for a while. Does anyone have any burning desire to say any one-liners about some other card, or should we go ahead and wrap it up?
Well, are we not going to talk about Brian's new Twitter fame?
Nutshot?
I was on a plane and I saw that, and I was like, what? Brian has like 600 likes over something someone said. I don't know if you saw, someone might have said it somewhere else too, but someone said nutshot on my Twitter thing. I'm like, I wonder if that's where Brian saw it or if you saw it somewhere else. But yeah, you got Twitter famous, man.
Yeah, I did not think. We're talking about
Chatterstorm?
I actually call it Chatterstorm. 1 and a green, make a squirrel token, storm, sorcery. Nickname Nutshot, a playoff grape shot, and also gut shot, and also getting kicked in the nuts. And so, no, I think I saw it in Leaving a Legacy, and then I was just like, LOL. I saw someone call this Nutshot. It's very funny, and the tweet went magic viral. So, shot through the nuts. You're too late. You give nuts a bad name. Can we write this whole song?
People think it's going to be banned in Pauper. I'm not convinced. That said, there aren't many storm cards left that are legal, especially that are win conditions. First Day of Class certainly makes this scary. People have brainstormed up lists that can win on turn 2. That said, the best decks in the format are blue decks, so we'll see.
Yeah, Big Storm here telling us not to worry about Storm. I think that card will get banned in Pauper pretty quickly. I think that all of the common Storm printings are very much to support a red-green Storm limited archetype, and they figured we'll just ban them all when it comes to Pauper, and I think that will be the right call. And we're not going to talk about all these cards, but like we said, we did a deep dive, but like cards we could have also deep dived on, the Nutshot and the other green Storm cards, Yavimaya, the green Urborg, Grief, all the Enchantress printings, Esper Sentinel, Cauldra Complete, Prismatic Ending, the Dothy Voidwalker and the other like Hateful Bears, Ignoble Hierarch, Sudden Edict. Like this set is insane. Like Modern, like Phil said, is going to be a totally different set on the other side of this, and Legacy is going to get a lot of reverberation coming down through it as well.
I was shot down when I mentioned this, but Caldera Complete, I think that Stoneblade should reevaluate how it looks and maybe start playing a Protect the Queen sort of strategy with like days and stuff. Make sure your Stoneforge lives and then play this. Granted, you are going to be weak to Swords to Plowshare decks. It doesn't bounce like Batterskull, but this punches a lot harder, and I think it could be interesting to see that Protect the Queen style strategy. Also, Phil, you're welcome to tell me that I'm dumb here, but it's interesting to at least think about in Death and Taxes where you have Mother of Runes to protect your Stoneforge and the Germ token. Just throwing that out there. But the chances you ever re-equip, yikes.
Close to 0. You're much more likely to reset it with a Flicker Wisp than actually pay 7 to equip. It only happens in those games where you really flood.
Gentlemen, we are at almost 2 hours right now, and before we get off task, like I said, we could deep dive on any of these cards we just threw out, and a bunch more that I'm not even thinking of. This set is stacked, and go listen to the Leaving a Legacy and the other Legacy podcasts who have hit them all a little more evenly. We chose to go deep, and I think we should leave it there before we talk for another hour.
Oh, but I miss you guys.
All right. Get out there and test some fucking cards, folks.
All right, so I put in a few rhetorical questions that I would like you two to answer. I think I know mine, but what do we think of the must attack each turn?
That's not a rhetorical question if you want us to answer it, Brian. That's literally not what that means.
Fine, whatever. The next one is rhetorical. I was grouping them together. You want me to ask the rhetorical then? Is Delirium actually a steep cost?
Well, you just threw...
Never mind. I'm fucking this up. We're going to re-record this. Phil, you're editing it.
Oh my god. All right, Phil, save Bryant. Rhetorical is a question that doesn't need to be answered.
Never mind.
Is grass green? You're not an idiot.
Although, fuck you, Phil. Not you, Phil. You, Phil. Because he's going to save this shit. I know of him.